At this time, it is my honor to introduce somebody who's been in the synagogue a few times, speaking with us and teaching us as well, and has been an integral part of our participation in the Civil Rights Experience. As I'd like to invite the pastor at the historic Bethel Baptist Church, Reverend Thomas Wilder Jr., to come up and share with us a few words this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I feel somewhat like a bride on her wedding night, and that is I have been waiting a long time for this occasion, but now that I'm here, I'm not sure exactly what I'm to do. But I do have a couple of objectives, and I do want to first thank Rabbi Hinken for this privilege, and want to thank Margaret Norman for the invitation. I do want to acknowledge my wife, Michelle, who's in the audience with me, and Dr. Boyer, who's the executive director of Bethel. But as I said, I am a little bit nervous. I will admit that to you, but I do have three objectives. And to go back to my story of a virgin on a wedding night, my three objectives are these. First, I want to admit to you up front, I don't know what I'm doing, but I am anxious to learn. Second, I want to convince you that even though I don't know what I am doing, I am here and committed to being here because I love you. The third thing I want to accomplish is to show you enough of myself so that after this initial encounter, you will be willing to try this with me again. And so I come to you to share with you some of my insights from the readings that I have read this past week regarding Leviticus chapter 12 and going through chapter 15, verse 33. As you know, the law, the Torah, was given at this particular portion, at this particular point, to emphasize the importance of sanctification, the importance of holiness, the importance of righteousness, the importance of purity before Adonai. The law has taught us that physical and moral and spiritual purity are imperative if we are indeed to be his people. And as we look at the law, there are some things that I think share with us some broader truths that go beyond physical and moral purity, and they deal with spiritual purity. I want to acknowledge the fact that your history and my history have some things in common. We both have gone through very traumatic events. We both have survived those traumatic events. We both go back in some ways to the same forefathers. We have, in many ways, similar traditions. But I want to talk today, for the few minutes that I have, regarding how we as blacks and you as Jews can help keep the community pure. I think it is important that we realize that as people of faith traditions, it is our purpose, even during civil rights and even in civil rights, to strive with the objective of purity before the Lord. The first thing I want to share as I talk about not only our common traditions, but our moral imperatives, is this, that both of us and both of our communities have dealt with and have shown the world suffering. When I look at the Torah reading, one of the things that is very important, and one of the things that sticks out to me, is that when impurity is in the camp in any way, the camp suffers. Black and Jewish communities of faith must never let the world forget that when sin goes unchallenged, it brings suffering. Sin isn't just something that one individual does and it stays in isolation. Sin spreads just as leprosy spreads, just as it contaminates all that it touches. And all that touch it become in some way impure. And it is a challenge that we do all that we can to keep the leprosy of hatred, the leprosy of bias, the leprosy of immorality out of the camp of the faithful. Our shared histories tell us that one of the other challenges that we have and one of the other responsibilities we have is that we must show the world that no matter how much suffering occurs, there is always a place of survival. You have survived many things that have occurred to you in past history, as I have. Blacks and Jews have both learned that in times of isolation, that we must keep hope going until we are rejoined to our beloved community. In the reading that I did, those who were separated from the camp had to learn how to survive. They had to learn how to survive mentally. They had to learn how to survive physically. They had to learn how to survive morally. They had to learn how to survive spiritually. And they had to do it all in the hope that one day, when all of the suffering is over, they will be reunited with their families and loved ones. We as blacks and you as Jews have fought for the right to remember the Holocaust, to remember the Middle Passage, to remember slavery, to remember segregation, to remember exile, not because we want to hold it in hatred, but we must remember the stories that our ancestors have taught us on how, in the midst of adversity, to still survive. I remember a time in my history, or our history, that's called the Red Summer. Some of you may not have ever heard of the Red Summer, but it occurred in mid-1919. It was a time when there were segregationists and when there were terrorists who decided that they wanted to attack black communities because blacks had begun to make progress and they didn't think that we should have that kind of progress. And so we were hunted, we were tortured, we were lynched, we were killed. Overall, there were about 240 people in one city that were killed, all because somebody thought that we didn't have the right to prosper. But we survived. We survived slavery. We have survived Jim Crowism. We have survived many things that have been launched against us. And this is a lesson that all of us must teach the world, that no matter what comes, the people of God will always survive. That no matter how long the exile, Adonai will always find a way to keep his people going and to keep his people under his wings. We must never forget. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 15 reminds us, remember that at one point you were a slave in Egypt. But then it tells us again in Exodus chapter 13, verses 8 through 10, that we are to teach the story of survival and the story of deliverance to our children, to our children's children, and if God allows, to our children's children's children. We must remember that civil rights is about survival in the midst of suffering. But the third thing the reading brought to my mind is the idea of sacrifice. That in many cases, uncleanliness in the community had the person that was committed or accused of being unclean had to sacrifice before they could be readmitted into society. Because in order for sin or illness or uncleanness to be atoned for, some sacrifice had to be made. After childbirth, Leviticus 12, the sacrifice required a burnt offering of a lamb 1 year old. After a skin disease, Leviticus 13 and 14, there was 2 clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet, yarn, and hyssop had to be required. After bodily discharges in Leviticus 15, there had to be 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. As the Torah infers, sometimes the biggest sacrifice that we make is one of critical self-examination. If we're not willing to examine ourselves constantly, we can sometimes become the vessel of uncleanness and impurity. If there is doubt, we must be brave enough and willing enough to allow critical others in our lives to examine us. I love Psalm 119 when it says in verses 23 and 24, "Search me, O God, know my heart, try me, know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." If there is a dangerous and contagious impurity in us, for the love of others, we must be willing to sacrifice our own personal pride, as the lepers were supposed to do in the time of the Levitical writing, and that is to cry out for the sake of others, "Unclean, unclean." What a great sacrifice it was to sacrifice pride, to sacrifice dignity. But what great love there is to say to others, "There's something about me that is not yet pure. I'm working on purity, but it's not yet there. And for the sake of you and for the love of you, I admonish you to understand that I'm not yet there." Blacks and Jews have had to make sacrifices so that others might live. We have had to make sacrifices so that many of the laws that we enjoy can be enjoyed by those who did not pay a price for their passing. The fourth thing I want to share as I hurry on to my conclusion, as I look at the responsive readings, or as I look at the readings for this week, I see how important it is that there be systems in place to allow people to go from unclean to clean. Systems give people hope. Systems give people organization. Systems should give people justice and impartiality. God set up this system not so that the rich could have an advantage over the poor, because part of the system was if you could not afford what was required, the system allowed for your poverty. Because the purpose of the system is not to exclude, but to find a way to include and to bring people back into atonement. It's so important for us as we look at our society, as we look at our systems, as we look at ourselves, to examine them, to see that there is a way for reconciliation, that there is a way for atonement. Forgiveness can be an act, but sometimes it's a system. Atonement may be an act, but many times it is a system. Forgiveness may be an act of the will, but many times it is a system. And the systems by God are designed to produce objectivity, to produce order, but most of all, to produce restoration. And may all the systems that we create and all the systems that we involve ourselves in give us a way to come back to Adonai, our Lord. The final impression I get as I read Leviticus 12 through 15 is this: that for all of us, the systems of being reconciled after an impurity take spiritual strength. Both of our communities, both through civil rights and through spiritual things, both of our communities know what it means to have the strength enough to forgive, the strength enough to go on, the strength enough to come back into a society that at some points has been hostile towards us, but to come back in that society with a strength to lead them to Adonai, our Lord. It doesn't take long to look at people like Fred Shuttlesworth, people like Dr. King, people like Desmond Tutu, people like your own Jewish leaders who marched with Dr. King, who represented the civil rights leaders in court, who gave money, who helped go to jail, who did other things so that the spiritual strength of the righteous could outshine the wickedness of the wicked. Leviticus 6, chapter 4 and 5 tells us that it takes spiritual strength for the sinner to make restitution before asking for forgiveness. Micah chapter 6, verse 8 says, this is what God requires: do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with our God. Despite centuries of persecution, both your people and mine have persevered with a spiritual hope, with a spiritual love, with a spiritual attitude of reconciliation to a world. And we could do this because we know that the Bible tells us, Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 and 23, that his mercies are new every morning and his faithfulness is great. So even in a world of sin, even in a world where all of us at some point may contact some kind of impurity, Adonai calls us back to himself with systems, with sacrifice, with a love for him first and a love for each other second. But then also he calls us to remember Deuteronomy 6, 20 and 21. That when your children shall ask you, what do these stones mean? That when they ask you, why do you do what you do? That you may be able to share with them, we were once slaves in this land, but we have been delivered by the power of God so that we can show others how life of God's people ought to be. God bless you. God keep you, and shalom to all of you.
I think you're underestimating yourself when you say you don't know what you're doing. Beautiful words. Thank you for sharing, Reverend. And you mentioned at the beginning that you're here out of love, and I hope you know and feel that the love we have for you is reciprocal, and that we love you as well. And we're grateful for your partnership, your words, and your leadership, and we look forward to continuing to develop those with you.